When I'm live streaming using a mobile network, I try to maximize the bandwidth and minimize the risk by spreading the traffic on multiple different mobile networks, so 4G and 5G networks. So I created this list of the mobile internet providers, and in the UK, there's only 4 companies which own and operate infrastructure for running a mobile network with 4G and 5G. So that's Vodafone, EE, O2, and 3. And there's a large number of virtual network operators. And what they do is they essentially have a contract with one of those 4 companies to use their infrastructure. So I created this list to make it clear how much resiliency you would get by using which network. So this is kind of a list I've created for myself. But essentially, if you want to get the maximum resiliency, you want to have one SIM card and one network access for each of these 4. So if you, for example, take 2 virtual network operators and use those, then you get less resiliency than if you take one network operator from 3 and one from O2, for example. So even if you do use 2 virtual network operators, you do get some additional resiliency because typically the virtual network operators, they would operate on a different frequency, or sometimes they will use an older generation of connectivity. So there's some resiliency gained even if you do use those, but I think the best idea is to use one from each of these 4. And then if you're already using one of the 4, then you want additional bandwidth or additional resiliency, then using one of the virtual operators might provide a little bit of that. So typically when you want to have a data contract with one of these operators, you have the option of going directly to the infrastructure owner. So let's just say, for example, O2, or you can go to one of the virtual network operators such as Tesco Mobile. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that some of these virtual network operators will use a previous generation of infrastructure when compared to the company that runs the infrastructure itself. So when Tesco Mobile was first launched, it was using previous generation of data connectivity, whereas O2 was already using the latest version of data connectivity for internet. So what O2 did was essentially give a discount to Tesco to use their lower bandwidth network connection, and in return them obviously made some money without damaging their own brand for having low bandwidth. So that was a win-win situation for both O2 in the sense that they don't damage their brand, but they increase their income. And it was a win for Tesco Mobile as well because they were selling feature mobile phones, which probably wouldn't need a lot of internet connectivity. And they managed to get a cheap deal on actually running a mobile network and selling the devices in their stores. So whenever you want to buy a data contract from one of these virtual operators, it's worth checking whether you will get 5G, 4G, or 3G data connectivity. And that gives you an idea of how much bandwidth you will get with that. But my preference is to go for the network operators directly, such as O2, EE, Vodafone, and 3. And that way, you know you're getting the latest generation of data connectivity that they have. So aside from going to the network operators directly themselves, another thing to keep in mind is that the network operators, sometimes even though they have a 5G network, they might not offer it on all their contracts. So for example, with O2, if you have a pay monthly contract, you will get 5G access. But if you're getting a pay-as-you-go contract with them, so you just pay upfront monthly for the data you want to use, then you'll get a 4G data access. So you'll have lower bandwidth. Not every network operator or virtual network operator works that way. So for example, with Smarty, they offer 5G even on their pay-as-you-go type of contracts. So to maximize the bandwidth and minimize the risk, my recommendation is to get one SIM from each of these network operators and to make sure that you get the latest generation of connectivity, as in 5G, as opposed to 4G or 3G. Make sure you get it directly from the network operators themselves, as opposed to one of their virtual operators. And in addition to that, to make sure that you check the contract that you're getting and ideally go for pay monthly contracts so that you make sure you get the best generation of data connectivity. And then if you already have these 4 and want to get additional ones, then my recommendation is to not go with the network operators themselves, but go with one of the virtual operators because they might use a different frequency even though they're using the same infrastructure. So you'll get a little bit more resilience and also a little bit more bandwidth from the frequency, which probably would be less saturated at any given point in time. And here's some data that I found, although I wouldn't read too much into this data because there's so many peculiarities around these things that you can't draw any conclusion from this. But 3 has 9.3 million customers and 296,000 cell antennas with 31.5 customer per antenna. And then Vodafone has 16.9 million customers with 383,000 cell antennas, which means 44 customers per antenna. And EE has 26.1 million customers with 490,500 cell antennas and 53 customers per antenna. And O2 has 31.3 million customers, 490,100 cell antennas with 64 customers per antenna. So the reason I say you can't read too much into this information is because even though it's the same antenna, same infrastructure, some of them will be using different frequencies and some of them might be using more frequencies than other ones. So in terms of saturation, doesn't necessarily mean that the one with more customers per antenna will perform worse than the one with the least amount of customers per antenna. But one thing that you can consider in relation to these statistics is that if you're going to a popular event, whether it's a music festival or a sporting event, then looking at how many customers each of these mobile network operators have, it will give you an idea of which ones would be the most saturated ones and which one will be less saturated. But that aside, as long as you have 4 of these data plans with each of these network providers, you should have the maximum resiliency that you can get. And then you obviously need to have a service which a third-party company provides so that you get the maximum bandwidth usage or resiliency as well. So there are software that you can get, apps for mobile phones to do this, and there's also separate units of devices that you can get which have 4 antennas and you can use 4 SIMs with those. And even I think Samsung phones do have a feature called Speed Booster or network booster or something like that. But it doesn't seem to cover all traffic and it doesn't seem to work in the way that you would need it for live streaming. But yeah, I just wanted to share this list as a reference in case other people find it useful. And this list will only be applicable to the UK.